we look at blockchain as solving human trust issues that cause inefficiency. And so if you have multiple parties, for example, that are trying to collaborate and work together, you always have inefficiency due to a lack of trust. And now you can actually solve those issues with blockchain, right?
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumi Tech and sponsored by Hippo Insurance, Turing, Upwest Labs, and Hillel at Stanford. Finally, we're talking about blockchain. Meet Aly Madhavji, managing partner at Blockchain Founders Fund, which invests in and venture builds top-tier startups. He is a limited partner on Loyal VC and Draper, Goren, Holm. Aly consults organizations on emerging technologies such as INSEAD and the UN on solutions to help alleviate poverty. He is a senior blockchain fellow at INSEAD and was recognized as a Blockchain 100 global leader by Lattice 80.
Aly Madhavji, thank you so much for joining me on 20-Minute Leaders all the way from Mexico. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much, Michael, for having me on the show.
I am incredibly excited to have you here, not just because you're an expert in blockchain, but I think that your whole journey, just sifting through the vast experiences that you've had, specifically in the blockchain space, both on an entrepreneurial perspective, but also on an investors and advisory perspective, I think is completely phenomenal. And I'm excited to both dive deep into the blockchain as an industry, but also understand how it may be relevant for young entrepreneurs and executives around the world, just even framing our mind as to what the heck is happening. Less than 24 hours ago, I believe that Tesla announced their investment into the Bitcoin space. And so obviously it's taking over the world by a storm. But now I'm excited to learn truly why. Aly, welcome. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how do you get started with blockchain?
Absolutely. So thanks again for having me on here, and excited to be chatting about blockchain and where we really see this technology going. I've been in this space for quite a while. Originally, more passively, holding Bitcoin and then early coins like Ethereum, and then decided in 2016 to jump in as an entrepreneur into the space. And as I was finishing my MBA at INSEAD, I was already working full time on a startup. Exited that at the end of 2017, which worked out to be pretty good timing, given sort of what happened afterwards. And since then, we started Blockchain Founders Fund and ScaleX Ventures. We now have well over 45 portfolio companies in the venture program. We also invested in several other funds like Loyal VC, where we're on the investment committee, as well as Draper, Goren, Holm, which is one of Tim Draper's funds on the blockchain side. So also an LP on that. And it's been fantastic. There's well over 150 portfolio companies across all of that. And it's been an incredible journey. And what really drives me at the end of the day is working with incredibly brilliant entrepreneurs who are passionate and put blood, sweat, and tears into making the world a better place, and helping the world to benefit from the innovation, the passion, the change that they're really trying to drive. And so I have, I think, one of the best jobs in the world, being able to just work with people like that.
I love that. And actually, right before we started, I asked you, I assume that you're not, originally based out of Mexico, and you mentioned that you're actually a traveler full time, and I think that's obviously a dream for many people. Do you wake up one day and say,
some people call it, homeless. Some people say I travel full time. It's a small distinction, maybe.
very thin line. Do you wake up one day and say, I'm going to go into the blockchain space and I'm going to become an expert in blockchain, both as an entrepreneur, as an investor and advisor? Is that what happened? Or is there some transition or train of thought as you unravel what's happening?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Definitely did not think of sort of this path in that way, right? For me, what really happened is, as I started getting exposed to this space, I started spending nights and days just talking to people that were already involved in the space, really diving deeper, having those really almost philosophical discussions on where we see the world and what it should be like. and then being on a lot of forums, things like that, really trying to understand where and what this technology is doing, and if it has the potential almost to help bring the world in the direction that we maybe idealistically or naively see it, and where it should be, right? And so that was probably the main catalyst, and I think at that time it was still very different to where the world is today, right? You're seeing a lot of maybe cracks in the systems, I would almost call it, in how we see this almost uncontrollable government printing that's happening right now, and inflation. I mean, I personally don't look at that any different from just taking money out of your bank account, right? Because everyone works hard for their money, and if you're inflating the amount of money, it's no different than just taking money out of your bank account or just making your money worth less. Like it's the same thing. It's just different flip sides of the same coin, and it's kind of crazy. And that's just on, say, on that aspect, right? I know you asked the question on where or why it's sort of important, like why does blockchain sort of matter? How should entrepreneurs think about it? And the way that we look at that, right, is we look at blockchain as solving human trust issues that cause inefficiency. And so if you have multiple parties, for example, that are trying to collaborate and work together, you always have inefficiency due to a lack of trust. And now you can actually solve those issues with blockchain, right? And there's already a lot of examples. And of course, then you have the philosophical discussion of like private blockchain, public, but you can sort of ignore all of that, right? I mean, at a sort of basic level. But if you're solving these human trust issues, you can take examples that exist from even large corporates. I don't know, say, Walmart. Walmart has, obviously thousands and thousands of suppliers. And if you take sort of what they're doing, they're tracking, for example, different products. So like one example that they have fully live right now is tracking food products. So say like mango, so sliced mango. So they track this between South America and North America. And they've now cut down the time because there's 50 suppliers essentially in the middle. You've got, everything from farmer to, picking, planting, cutting, packaging, all the different middlemen for transportation, all the way to getting to the end store. It used to take them 7 days to understand, and be able to trace through all those systems where it actually came from. Where did that product come from? Now it takes them 2.2 seconds. And so you can see, because you're bringing everyone you're solving this sort of trust issue, all these multiple system issues, you can actually create a lot of efficiency. And this is, across a lot of different industries. But that's just one example, because a lot of people also generally don't see live solutions. It's still a lot of people talk about this industry very theoretically.
Right, and I think Ali, that's really, I think, something that I could get a lot of help with, because I remember, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was talking about mining Bitcoin, right? That was the term that everybody's throwing around. You have a computer, wow, you should be mining Bitcoin right now, and I don't know what the heck that means, right? And time goes on and blockchain becomes more, I start hearing about it more in the context of an industry and an ecosystem, and now there's venture capital investors that are dedicated to this. There's more different types of coins that are hitting the market, right? I believe if I go on Robinhood now, there's a bunch of different cryptocurrencies that I could invest in, and now you have the likes of Elon Musk coming and saying, this is the future. Can you walk me through a brief history lesson over what happened in the past few years that really made blockchain so central to today? And from your interpretation, where do you think we're headed? And I'm asking, as a young entrepreneur, that I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, where am I in this whole ecosystem that I still barely understand?
Yeah, so I think there's several sort of interesting angles to look at it on, right? So you've got the cryptocurrency industry, which I think, has, obviously there's still a lot, like, I mean, you hear a lot of the negative stuff about this industry and you hear some of the positive stuff, but, cryptocurrency is one part that I think is fascinating from a number of angles. But one, Bitcoin, of course, being a finite resource in a world where, printing of money is, essentially unlimited, from their words, not even mine. And from the perspective that gold in reality is essentially infinite as well in some certain cases, depending on how you look at it. But if you factor in a long-term perspective of humans will evolve with technology and be, more present in space, and space mining will exist, well, you've got $92 billion of gold per person on Earth, right? And so you can essentially just discount cash flow back that calculation, whether you think that's 50 years, 500 years, 5,000 years, doesn't matter. Bring it back to present, it's an infinite number. So, so that essentially is a part where gold as well is not a finite asset in reality, or at least the way we would sort of typically conceive. And so Bitcoin, creates a lot of value then from just being what people are putting essentially into it, which is trust of it being a finite. Not trust of it being, it is a finite asset, but trust that it is an alternative to the current system. Which in reality, trust is still a big part of it, and it's a collective trust, right?
So can you explain to me a little bit about how that trust is being built? Because obviously, the whole assumption behind blockchain is this idea of validating it constantly, this constant validation, this constant agreement between a lot of parties, which makes it much harder to compromise and is not centralized in any way, shape, or form like banks are. So can you demystify it a little bit for me now? Really, what is it in the essence? Why is it more trustworthy? And then I'd love to move on, hearing a little bit about your activity as an investor in this space, and how startups can find themselves entering this ecosystem.
Yeah, so I don't want to, I guess, make this too complex, right? But if you sort of look at it, you've got a lot of different parties essentially that are helping to secure the system, sort of all around the world. They don't know each other necessarily, and that creates essentially the certainty that all of the transactions then are validated, not manipulated. Versus the alternative to that would be like, you're a corporation, you have your one system, no one else can really see it, and then you're sort of telling the public like what those numbers really are, right? And so this is why like then auditors exist, other parties exist to check your books, but it's still not to the level of say fully decentralized, right? And you've had issues with this then, right? So you've had issues of trust against public companies, Enron's an example, others, where because there wasn't a lack of understanding and third-party validation, you then had issues. And an example again would be like, I don't know, validating like oil reserves or other things, right? If there was multiple third parties and then the data couldn't be manipulated and couldn't be changed, like you then have more safety and security, right? And I don't want to go too complex, so I'm trying to make it a little bit more basic. And so Bitcoin's network then is much more secure just because it's decentralized nature, right?
Right.
And that's sort of more on the crypto. That's a mix of crypto and blockchain, but we sort of talked about Bitcoin in reality. If you look at the corporate world and how they're using blockchain is very interesting as part of solving those inefficiencies due to human trust that I sort of mentioned earlier. And that's quite interesting because you've already got players that have fully live solutions like Walmart, right? And we didn't even touch on, depending on where your audience is from, some might be aware of like food safety issues and outbreaks, right? So, in China, you had the melamine scandal with tainted milk, right? And I think there was 300,000 sick babies. In Europe, you had the tainted horse meat scandal where I think in upwards of 13 or more countries in Europe, they were selling horse meat, but it was labeled as beef, right? And it took 4+ years for Interpol to get to the bottom of it. If you look at North America, you have the Chipotle Mexican grill scandal, which costed billions of dollars in shareholder value. However, if you could just trace to the bottom of your suppliers easily, you wouldn't have these issues. So this is where it's transforming industries like that, as an example. And you're already seeing it, right? In China, for example, Walmart's goal is to have 50% of all fresh meat, 40% of vegetables, and 12.5% of seafood on blockchain, quite shortly. So there's pretty aggressive goals, and some of that could get delayed with the pandemic, but there's pretty aggressive goals and a very clear ROI to it, right? HSBC's moved well over $1 trillion on their blockchain for FX settlements, for example, and they've saved over 25% over their traditional FX settlement process, right? So you have a lot of different benefits and clear ROIs on this sort of stuff. And so, you got to look at what are the real examples of what's happening out there as well on the blockchain side, as well as understanding the what's happening on the crypto side. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of an idea of progress being made in the space.
And so now, as a young entrepreneur myself, and to the pre-Series A perhaps founders that are following this, what are some things that we should be keeping in mind? Because honestly, I am far behind on doing my homework for blockchain, and I feel that I'm already behind on this material. But what do I need to be doing in order to prepare myself for this emerging industry in this ecosystem? Whether I'm in fintech or not, how am I going to be met with blockchain along the next few years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and blockchain goes across a lot of different industries, right? So it's not just fintech; it's going to touch all sorts of industries, and already is, right? In reality, I think we look at companies across all sorts of sectors. A big chunk of our companies are blockchain. We have a lot of companies that are actually non-blockchain as well that are emerging tech, and I think the big thing is it's important to understand these trends, understand these technologies, see if it makes sense for your business. But at the end of the day as well, like you can't be, going down this road if it's not creating, major amount of core strategic value as an early stage startup. It probably then doesn't make sense to use this technology if it's not the core value add for your end consumer, right? So, or your customer. So, the big thing at the end of the day, I think, is just figure out what's going to drive the most amount of value for your customer. That's understanding and having discussions on like pain points, value that they're looking for, what they're trying to solve, et cetera, or what you can solve based on understanding their challenges. And then taking all of that and figuring out, what is the best way to solve it. And then, what does the path to solving that look like? Because it's not always linear. And if you do that, that's probably the best stages. And then when you get to, your pre-Series A or Series A, I'm sure you'll have some questions from all sorts of investors on any sorts of technologies like AI, machine learning, blockchain, all sorts of stuff. And just being aware of it, you can answer those questions, understand if that fits into your roadmap or not, et cetera.
That makes a lot of sense. Ali, we just have a few minutes left, but I really want to thank you for taking the time to be here. I know how busy you are and how involved you are with the ecosystem, and I appreciate you sharing, just a sliver of all the insights and information that you have. I want to know what gets you so excited about blockchain. Why are you dedicating your whole self to this? Whether it's advising the United Nations or contributing to all these different publications, working with all these companies. What is it about this ecosystem or this industry that really gets you excited?
That's a great question. I do spend a lot of my time, in this sector, as you mentioned, working with the United Nations, working with institutions like INSEAD, which is, another leading business school out there. And at the end of the day, it's really understanding how this technology is solving some of the biggest challenges we have as we continue to move into a digital world, right? So an innately digital way of digital transactions, right? It makes a lot of sense. Solving those trust issues that we talked about in a business world that's going to unlock a lot of value. And so we're seeing this really from an ROI perspective when we look at how this technology is going to continue to transform and impact different sectors, as with other technologies. So you take that and you pair it with, AI. We look at an exponential increase in value from the convergence of technologies and having them move together, right? And these are really, really big things because blockchain alone doesn't really solve that much if you're not pairing it with other technology that create, that amplification, as part of the solution.
That makes a lot of sense. And I have to say that after this, it just sparks my curiosity just dive deeper. I have to see what you're doing with your fund and the different companies you're involved with, because I feel definitely after this episode that I'm lacking behind. Even if I'm not personally working on blockchain, I think that it's something that we all have to have at least a fundamental understanding of, and how it's going to meet us, and what responsibility do we have as a part of this ecosystem, because it's here to stay. And so it's now it's a part of our reality. Ali, I really appreciate you coming here. I have the hardest and most fun question before we end, which is 3 words that you would choose to describe yourself.
That's a really good question. I mean, I would start off with work ethic, change, and passion. And yeah, and at the end of the day, I think for any entrepreneur, it's really going out there and working harder than anyone else around you, and then surrounding yourself with great people and just having the passion to change the world.
I love it. I love it. Ali, thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy your time in Mexico. And I'm going to catch you on one of your world trips to continue picking your brain. So thank you very much.
Sounds good. Always happy to chat.
Take care.